And we'll start with unfinished business. Order 2190, order to take order 20-187 off of the table for consideration.
Cindy, before we do that, can we adopt the revised agenda?
Oh, yes. Could I get a motion to accept the revised agenda?
Move approval.
All
Do you
right.
want an explanation?
Do you want an explanation?
Oh.
I think everybody understands.
I haven't had time to look at it yet, to look at.
So the only thing that normally we would just say, would you allow us to add an executive session? But because of the way we had this set up as two separate meetings, we needed to reformat the meeting into a special meeting that has a subset of a workshop so that we can do the executive session at the end. So that's all we're doing, is adding an executive session to talk about a tax acquired property issue.
So instead of adjourning one to go to the workshop, we're going to just stay in the council council meeting. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments? If not, Sophie, do you want a roll call vote or a show of hands?
So I have that as, I think it was Cheryl and Tom as the motion in the second.
It
It was
wasn't
Sam.
me.
Sam.
Was it
Sam.
Sam and Tom?
Yep.
Yes, I think we need unfortunately, a roll call because it has to be unanimous.
Yep.
So I'm just gonna do it based on who's here because I don't have it written down.
Sure.
Counselor Perry,
In favor.
Counselor Maynard,
In favor?
Counselor Grenier,
In favor.
Counselor Gardner,
In favor?
Counselor Robertson,
In favor.
Counselor Kuntz,
In favor.
Counselor Osher.
In favor.
It's unanimous and we have revised the agenda.
Okay. So now we will go to unfinished business, order 2190, order to take order 2187 off the table for consideration. Take a motion, please.
Move approval.
Second.
Sophie, do you want to take a vote or? It's still on mute, but that's okay.
Counselor Gardner, just as you put something up to your,
In favor?
Counselor Grenier,
In favor.
Counselor Kuntz,
In favor.
Counselor Maynard,
In favor?
Counselor Osher,
In favor.
Counselor Perry,
In favor.
Counselor Robertson.
In favor.
Okay, so now we'll take order 20-187, order accepting the bid received from Leo Kenny of Orono, Maine to purchase the town of Orono's interest in tax acquired property located at 25 College Heights for $33,000, and further authorizing the town manager to execute all documents necessary to reflect this transfer and release the town interest in said property. Take a motion, please.
Move approval.
Second.
All right. Sophie, you'll present or anything?
I can if people need me to. Do you need me to present or are we?
No, I guess they're good.
Okay. Counselor Gardner,
In favor?
Counselor Grenier,
In favor.
Counselor Kuntz,
In favor.
Counselor Maynard,
In favor?
Counselor Osher,
In favor?
Counselor Perry,
In favor.
Counselor Robertson.
In favor.
The motion passes 7-0.
Okay. Moving on to council workshop. Presentation introducing the concept of environmental justice. Presenter is Counselor Robertson with guest Mia Johnson from Community Action Works. If Mia, there she is. She's been elevated, I guess. And it looks like Cheryl might have frozen. There she is.
Okay. My computer is glitching as well. There's Mia. Okay. Am I frozen?
No,
Great.
Sitting still.
you
Cheryl,
are
are you
frozen.
frozen?
Okay, hold on. We seem to be having internet problems here. How am I now? Can you hear me now?
You're fine.
No?
No, you're fine.
We can hear you.
You're fine.
You hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, what's happening on your end? Because I can't see what's going on.
We're
We're
all,
watching your box.
yep.
Okay. I want to put the video on. I just wanted to, I'll just quick and I'll turn it over to Mia. But my computer I just feel like it's just not working right now today. Close this out. So please let me know if you can hear me or not. Can you hear me right now?
Yes.
Again.
Do I have a
We can hear
weird
you.
voice? All right, I'm going to try to put my video back on. This is Mia Johnson. She is from Community Action Works. And a couple years ago, I think it was a couple years ago now, wasn't it, Mia, that I met Mia at my house and we had a conversation about, and it's not a new concept, but it's a fairly new concept to people in municipalities. And right now, the state of Maine has no statute about environmental justice when they are looking to create policy or making decisions when it comes to land use or zoning or where you're gonna permit a mill or a landfill. And so I thought that Mia, since she was an expert at this, could add to the conversation and kind of give us a little bit of history about why environmental justice is important and why it's coming to the forefront of legislation right now across the country. And so I will turn it over to you, Mia.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Mia, she, they series, the director of Just Transition and the coastal lead organizer at Community Action Works. And I've been organizing in the Northeast and in the Boston area for 17 years. I've worked in around environmental issues as well as community and land and building planning. I've also been a part of and continue to be a part of what is called solidarity economy work, which is also part of Just Transition, but more encompassing, looking around different types of economic growth around such as worker owner co-ops, co-op housing, democratic process, democratic governance, things like that, that are ways of shifting and sharing both power and economy. So I'm saying all that because some of the stuff I'm based on my conversation with Cheryl that might be helpful in thinking and just kind of beginning to percolate why the town of Orono might see in ways that environmental justice could be used as guidelines for building policy and thinking about what does it mean to create planning that is inclusive of all potential residents and all current residents. So I think about this kind of stuff as more long-term. I'm going to give you a definition. Well, let me just ask, it just was the show of hands or nods or however makes sense for folks. You can also use your little reaction button if you have access to it. At the bottom of your Zoom, know what the term environmental justice means or any of that. Anybody? I know it's like a big jargon word right now, but does anybody know what it means? Yeah, okay. Counselor Gardner, I see a hand up. Do you want to share what you've learned about it, or and you don't have to, obviously, if you.
Yep, that's fine. Just that there's, I mean, and I may not be correct, but my understanding is that folks are really starting to take a look at the intersectionality between race and socioeconomic status and the environment and how all of those things fit together.
Yeah. And a baseline, and the where you see it play out the most is in the EPA. So I'm going to give you the EPA definition because it takes it a step further. Beyond looking at it, what does it actually mean to implement policy, law, and ordinances, right? So where I've seen it and used it in work is doing stuff around transit development, transit-oriented development, building development, safe space development. All of these things have impact when you're looking at environmental justice through that lens. And then how do you build something that ultimately is actually makes it better for everyone? And that's kind of the beautiful thing about environmental justice is that even if you don't think you have impacted community based on race, you may have impacted community based on class that are also exposed to environmental hazards. And so environmental justice is about the kind of the over big shot is about understanding that there are environmental impacts to choices that we make long term. So when you see communities that are having, in our work, we have, we know that our communities that we are working in often are targeted because of socioeconomic or race-based areas by corporations often who want to give an economy to a town, but at the same time bring in a lot of hazards, toxins and things, and say, well, but we're going to trade money and work for potential long-term effects of these really dangerous toxins. So one way you can see that happening is in, dumps landing somewhere, where they get placed, how they get placed, where they build manufacturing gets built, mills get built, and the water runoff. All those are environmental impacts, and the way that they're designed and often where they are picking the places is not arbitrary. They're picking places that are going to have the least resistance and also often in need of economic input, right? So a really big national example of that is the Keystone XL pipeline, or the Dakota Access Pipeline, right? Would be a good moment of looking there. They could have, the straight path would have been going through the town, right? And the town said, the large city that was next to it, the town said no. So they did, but that reroute was going to go over an aquifer over Indian country, right? And they weren't expecting there to be enough of a resistance to stop it, right? Because this is a small population, they don't have a lot of power, or they don't have a lot of leveraging. And that's when it becomes an environmental justice concern, right? When there's not, when they're isolating and selecting based on economics and race. Are y'all with me? You following? Okay. So the long term is thinking about, because the long-term harm is if leaks happen into the aquifer, the entire region is impacted, right? So it's not just like the impacted community directly, but they'll be the first impact. But over time, anyone who's connected to that water stream or water source will be impacted. So it's the same thing. It's like the long term, but the company often has moved on, right? And they're often not held accountable for the cleanup, maintenance, or the leaks themselves are often seen as like, well, that, we wrote it into our contract, or that was signed off on in some kind of way. So these are the loopholes that happen in this negotiation because of an economic stimulus, which is often desperately needed by the town. So there's this really challenging way of like moving that forward. So the EPA kind of has held the core of environmental justice at more of the federal level. It goes across in more areas, but you see it in the EPA because of the type of development. It's also in transportation, they use it. There's a Title I, which is what is used when we do transit-oriented development in like protected communities or protected class. So that's similar with the disabilities. So it's also can be used and they're starting to use similar framings. They're different, but similar. Is that make sense? Okay. And if I'm giving you too much information, you can just say, too much information. Nada, stop it. You know, I don't like people to be like, oh, and then we're going to do this. I'm like, okay, that's not exactly what we're talking about, but cool. All right, you do that. So I'm just going to read this out because it's just very clear. And then I can send it along to Councilor Robinson afterward, if you'd like. So this is from the EPA. Environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policy. And for the EPA, the environmental piece is where they do it, but the laws, the regulations, so this is why the regulation is tied to protected class, right? Because it's also, that's where environmental justice pulls in there. So you can begin to see how each of these different federal areas of work can be aligned to how does environmental justice impact across. The most important parts of this definition, and this is why I said, Councilor Gardner, it's there, but it's not just the intersection. It's meaningful involvement is really important from the beginning. When you're doing environmental justice policy making and thinking and being proactive ahead of time, it means that you're gathering the information, talking to the people who are going to be firstly impacted, right? Or potentially firstly impacted. And you're making sure, okay, how do we make sure that if we wanting to develop this site, who's in that surrounding area? So our abutters and then potential abutters, they might have a stake in understanding what's going on there. We're going to gather that information. So doing zoning right is doing that well, right? It's not just getting a sign and check off and someone handing a check over. It's like really doing the investigation and making sure. That's one piece of it. And then it's the implementation and enforcement, right? So the other two pieces that are important. So meaningful involvement, implementation, which is the how, right? So keeping people involved throughout the process. And there's a number of different ways, because some ways in bureaucracy can be, not as easy to negotiate, right? And I'm guessing in town, there's some things that you're like, yeah, we have to do that in closed door, but there are still ways you can meaningfully involve people and alert them to the process so they know what the next steps are to be a part of the implementation process, right? And then how do you continue to keep them engaged as you progress? Did this work? Is it working? Where are we creating and pre-planning our checks and balances, right? So although, in one of the things that happens, and one of the reasons that environmental justice is often looked at as like this, like, ooh, we're very scared, because normally it's an afterthought, right? It's when communities haven't been meaningfully involved, haven't been part of implementation, and then weren't engaged afterward. It's when these errors happen, whether consciously, directly, or indirectly, that creates the problem, right? And in my work, in my field, one of the ways we see it is people get sick and people start dying, right? So we see it when it's like way beyond a problem, right? And another way that when I was doing a transit, kids started getting asthma. Asthma rates are skyrocketing, right? Because of diesel fuel emissions and because of congestion and the way that things weren't being monitored. So that's an impact. Another way that you can see it is in building when certain developers are getting building codes and getting sign-offs, but there's no meaningful community involvement. So now there's no more green space. Or if you're in a more rural context, access to water rights and mains in order to have access to, being able to water and maintain your fields and maintain your animals. When those are being all diverted, and then somehow 5 years later, everyone's having to pay the same person to get access, right? Having to pay a fee. It's like the old days when you see the shows where the laundry guy is having to pay off everybody. Someone's collecting his unofficial bills, right? It's the same kind of concept that happens in more rural settings, but it happens over time. So what you want to do to interrupt that is apply environmental justice guidelines that then begin to create and craft policy that allows you all to be ahead of that. So that's like the rough and dirty of what is environmental justice and how you, a couple different ways you might think about using it. And then I'm not exactly sure what is going on in Orono and things that you guys come up with, but
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very intrigued. I think that this would be something that you could, council has now created, when we do an ordinance, we put a little bit of legislative history or preamble before the ordinance. And I could see something like this being kind of an overarching policy that Orono looked at all of that, these different stages to develop the ordinance. So I think it's an intriguing issue. So any other counselors have any questions or comments?
and sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
One other thing I was going to say, and it's still under development, and I saw one version of it. I'm not exactly sure where it's at, but there is legislation around the Green New Deal that is that has environmental justice overarching framing. And it goes as far as, and one of the things I really appreciate about Maine's Green New Deal as opposed to Massachusetts, which, you know, we're behind the ball, we're, you know, in some ways ahead of the ball, but I'm like, nope, guys, we're behind the ball, is that they're inclusive of the tribes in developing their Green New Deal plan. So again, that is actually, as a state initial policy, that is enacting environmental justice, right? Because they're making sure groups that are often left out of legislation are connected to the legislation meaningfully by asking them how, right? Because, you know, as you all know, living next to a tribal nation, the laws are different, right? And the laws overlap in weird ways. So, and they're complicated. So it's important to understand from people's own experience. But that's a place to look.
Sophie?
I'm just curious, Counselor Robertson, if you're thinking that maybe in the preamble to the environmental plan that we're creating, we might add kind of a rubric for this, or things that ordinances should get kind of
I don't see why it,
triggered.
I mean, I don't see how it could hurt, right? To have something like that. I'm really kind of wondering, you know, when that might come into play with us, you know, in Orono. But we are, I mean, we are close to the tribes. And then one of my questions for Mia was, and I know Sam had a question too, was we have a very large landfill, as you know, and also Nine Dragons that just started back up again, a paper mill that just started back up again. And I always wonder if environmental justice had been in play, would those be there today, as close as they are to the tribes?
I think it's hard to say because that's the past. Two, it may have been another version of it, right? And the thing is that it's not that we don't need dumps or we don't need places to take waste or to figure it out. And there's a lot of policy around that where I think we could have a lot less if we did those things. But we right now, this is where we are, right? And it's how, right? And who's accountable and responsible to cover it. And again, a lot of that is like the incentives to have, you know, whether it's direct economy because you're getting taxes back or fees back or rent of some kind back from the company, or it's creating a labor force, right? And hopefully they're good jobs, right? But within, and what I mean by good jobs is like the good jobs standard of like, you know, a living wage with benefits and that kind of thing, not just a job. And so but good jobs, that kind of stuff, building code, all of that kind of stuff ahead of time, having that done through a lens of environmental justice would mean that even if you'd made those contracts, the likelihood of the conditions would have been much better, not only for the workers, but the town and overall, like how, you know, how do we come together and make it work? So like, I can't say that, I mean, given Maine state policy of of collecting everyone's trash, that makes it hard to say there wouldn't be, because it would be somewhere if it wasn't in Orono, right? It would be somewhere. So
Right.
so that's a larger issue, but how could be directed by the town, and to what standards could be directed and implemented by the town. And that may help to trigger other standards, right? So that's the other
Right.
thing about something like this.
Right. Thank you, Mia.
I didn't really have a question, it's just more of a comment. I mean, I think we all feel that this is pretty important, but there's absolutely room for improvement. I think we're all kind of aware of this, but I think not completely, not to the level maybe we need to be. But what I really do like is the fact that we're looking at putting this sort of procedural step in where, that it will be included, that is important for us to tack on. And yes, like you said, it has to be that the dump is there somewhere. The landfill is going to be somewhere, and there it is. And we've sort of inherited that, and it's a bit of an issue. Granted, it's not an Orono, but it's all of our issue. But anyway, I think this is a great step, even though I think we all probably think we are trying to do a pretty good job about this to begin with, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, and a lot of times we think so, but once there's an overturn, somebody else takes leadership, there's a shift, all of that stuff without policy, right? And as you all know, without it being written and there being a code or a way of following it, and enforcement of that being followed, right? You can have really great practices under some folks' leadership, and then, someone's like, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. Oh, that really interrupted us getting this great deal, but this great deal that may have been connected to, 50 years of, community going through cancer treatment, right? So this is also just like, how do we interrupt that and understand what we're doing, and I think a really important piece to think about is the stuff around PFAS, right? Like, people just did not understand, and still to the depth don't understand the impact of PFAS and water, and how long this overlooked issue is now becoming something that is having really long and lasting effects and has real impact in communities, and it's over time, right? So some of the things that we're talking about you don't see immediately. Buildings falling down, they may have gone up, and that, corporation has moved on and found another place to work cheaper and get cheaper labor. And now you have a building that is someone else is taking over, and it's falling down or being burned. So, and we all know those things happen because we see the news.
I think a great example of Orono's starting to recognize this is we're looking at solar farms or solar leasing. And one of the things we talked about was who's responsible for taking it down in 20 years? Where does that, and how do we deal with the waste of that? Even though it seems like it's a fairly clean product, all the equipment for solar can rust out and be a problem at the end. So
Right.
I think that's where an example of where we can start in a very small scale.
Right. And maintenance and land use, and can you build, can you make it regenerative? I'm not sure if Orono could create its own microgrid, right? So it has its own energy grid that can make sure it's fueling its own town, right? So how does that all work, and who's managing it?
Yeah. Sophie, did you have something?
I was just going to say, I think that currently we, through our planning process, I think do a better job than many communities in terms of getting public input and feedback from the very beginning, and having neighborhood meetings. And our town planner is incredibly interested in having dialogue and discussion, which is great. What I see as a positive here is creating kind of, not a checklist, because that kind of makes you feel like people are just doing things and going through emotion, but rather, we look at the impacts of certain things, and we say, in this neighborhood, this is how far we go out for our discussion. And perhaps some of the discussion that we need to have needs to go beyond boundaries, and kind of having the questions out there for who does this really impact. So you sit back and you really think about who are the potential people? What are the potential drawbacks? How do we engage those people before we make decisions that will impact them? So I think this is great. And I will just say, Mia, you are absolutely a joy to listen to.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. I was like, I feel like I was like trying to throw everything at you guys too fast. Like, here's everything. I got 20 minutes. Go. Hope you can catch it all.
You did a great job. Does anybody else have any questions for me or comments? No?
No, I just wanted to say too, thank you so much, Mia. I appreciate you coming and having a little conversation with us. And I'm just kind of at the beginning stages of really kind of delving into this. And one of the things that caught my eye about this is the community-based. It's a community-based environmental decision making. And I'm trying to, it's more just it's an introduction for us right now, as I've kind of talked to you a little bit about this. But like Sophie said, it's a start, and we do have a committee now that's kind of that we're looking into some environmental impacts of the decisions that we make. And so this is not, it amazes me that there's no state statute around this anywhere, I don't think, except in New Jersey. I think New Jersey just made environmental justice a statute, right? But nobody else has. So we're really kind of on the cutting edge at the
You are literally
municipality level, right? We're kind of leading. We'll lead the state in this. But yeah, unless anybody else has any other questions or thoughts, or I know we had some participants. I don't know if they wanted to say anything. And our town planner is here. But I don't know. If I guess we're all set. Does that sound right? Everybody feel like?
Thank you all for having me. It's been enjoyable to be here. It's fun to think about this outside of a city context. And one of the things that when I first was sharing this with Cheryl and having this conversation was the aha moment when people were like, oh, it's not just, the Black, Brown, Indigenous and communities of color. I'm like, no, actually it's a lot bigger than that. The fact is, it's also class-based. And when you start looking at federal minimums, there's a lot of the state that's covered. So it's a lot of people, and a lot of people don't realize that they're targeted to be harmed unduly and unjustly, and they also can, like what you guys are doing, can take preventative steps to still get what they need, which I think is really important, and to live healthy lives. So thank you all for doing this work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mia.
Thanks very much. Bye. So we will move on to a brief town manager report.
All right. So just a reminder that town offices and all non-emergency response services will be closed on Thursday and Friday. That's November 26th and 27th in observance of the upcoming holiday. Town staff and council, along with incredibly generous local businesses, civic organizations, and community members, hosted the Scott Scripture Memorial Community Thanksgiving Dinner last Thursday. You guys delivered approximately 300 meals, which is incredible. And we had so much outpouring of generosity with financial contributions that we actually ended up with more money than we spent, which is not something we're used to. But what we are doing is we're hearing that there are a few groups of folks in our community that are really having some food security issues. So staff is reaching out and working with the Good Shepherd Food Bank to create food boxes that we are actually going to deliver to community members to have them with this additional money that was left. So I'm kind of excited, and for me, it was a way to further work in Scott's memory, and he would have really approved of this. So
Sophie, quick
kind
question.
excited. Mhm.
If someone were just hearing about this and wanted to contribute, would they be able to do so now? And if so, what's the best
We
way to do
take
it?
anybody's money anytime, Sam.
Had a feeling that's where we're going. But how would one throw their bucks at you?
They could either put something in an envelope and stick it in the drop box outside of town hall, just to my attention or Belle's attention, and just make sure we know it's for this purpose. Could give me a call, you could send me an email, we can make lots of arrangements. So it really
Great.
depends on how people want to get it to us.
Thank you. What a great community.
We have an amazing community. So town staff also continues to work closely with UMaine and state officials. I was on the phone this weekend with CDC to monitor the COVID-19 exposures and confirmed cases. We knew this was going to happen. We talked about it way back in the spring that we expected to see a spike in the fall. It is here nationally, in the state, and in our community. UMaine is the students will be out of the dorms on no later than Wednesday morning, and are going to do the rest of the semester remotely. That's been the plan all along. And we continue to work with off-campus folks to try to keep people as safe as we can. It is meaning that folks are moving some of their services and operations to a more remote status. I will say that we have some community members and some businesses that have really done a great job working with Rob and Jeff to address some concerns. So I think your ordinance that you adopted earlier this year is really important. We've been using that with the complexes, and they've been trying. So I think just want to let people know that the numbers are increasing. We are out of an abundance of caution. We have 2 town staff right now who are quarantining because of potential exposure. So we're working really hard to try to keep our staff safe so that we'll have people here to provide services in the long term. So given these, the uptick in the transmission rates and the modification of safety guidance, Parks and Rec staff and I met and have determined that we really cannot find a way to safely meet the guidelines and provide a quality program for basketball this winter. We don't have the space for it, and we are not figuring out how to make that work. So we are going to transition and look for some virtual programming, as well as use our partnership with Campus Recreation to offer some esports opportunities for kiddos, which is kind of exciting. And we are also looking at ways that we can support and encourage community members to get out and enjoy the winter when it arrives. So we're looking at ways to maximize some of our outdoor recreational opportunities. And that might mean some either writing for some grants or looking for some opportunities to purchase some equipment that we could loan. So to create kind of an equipment loan program for folks who
Great.
wouldn't normally, for example, be cross-country skiers, but because their normal sport or activity is not available, might like to be able to get out and do some of that skiing. So skiing is a bad example because we already have a rental program, but the idea being we don't want anybody who does not have the financial means to have equipment to not be able to participate. So if we could hear from folks about what the needs might be, that would be helpful. They could contact me, contact Mitch. There will be information going out tomorrow about basketball and esports for the community. The community development, library, and parks and recreation are also looking at ways to celebrate because we can't do light up the night, which would be our normal activity. So they are getting incredibly creative. Morgan and Megan are leading the charge. We've got community arts and craft and virtual story times. And we're also rolling out light up the community as opposed to light up the night. Sam, Counselor Kuntz is taking that in hand, and he's getting his whole neighborhood excited to light up their houses. And
I just want to say this. We already have about 26 or 27 houses that are pretty well lit. Versant is making out like a bandit here. Hopefully we won't have any more power outages.
Sam, can you see it from outer space?
I expect a call from the International Space Station any day.
Okay. Doesn't really count.
I just put an extra 200 bulbs up the other day just to make sure that people on the west side of my house got the full picture. So.
I would encourage people to be on the lookout on the website and community development, library, or Parks and Rec Facebook pages because there is, I'm going to get it wrong, but Do Good December Bingo. So some real creative ideas to try to get people invested and involved.
Sophie,
Yeah.
could we go back to basketball for just a moment?
Yeah.
I'm interested in what are other communities in the area doing in that regard, or do you know?
So I can tell you that our Parks and Rec people have been talking locally, regionally, and across the state. And it all depends, Tom. For whatever reason, the private or non-Parks and Rec offered like AUSA and,
Mhm.
you know, they are playing games and we can't quite figure out how, because the community sports guidelines that we see from the CDC tell us we can't play games. There are some communities where there is enough space that they can put 5 or 6 or 8 kids in a gym and do clinic-based skills, which had been our hope to be able to do that. We run into a problem in Orono, just lack of gym space anyway. We have a really hard time with that. And so when we started to have to stretch to try to get just a few kids, we looked at the Keith Anderson house and we thought we might be able to get a couple of portable basketball hoops for upstairs. But by the time you start looking at the sprinkler system, the stained glass windows, you know, it was like a little bit too much risk for that.
Mhm.
And when the state issued their latest set of community services sports guidelines, we can't do that.
Yep.
So that's, I think, kind of where we are.
Thank
And the idea being with any of our activities, if suddenly the environment changes and the rules change and we can put something on, we are ready to pivot and be able to do that. We're not making decisions that are cast in stone at this point. We need to be flexible and able to meet the need.
Good.
Is that good?
Thank you.
I had a couple of questions today about the Bangor Daily News article around about the Brewer standoff. And yes, the Orono Police Department does in fact have a trained negotiator. FBI crisis negotiation training is something that Josh found a while ago. It was free for us because I think it's the one that we hosted. Think about elite crisis intervention training with negotiation kind of also put on top of that. It has served us very well. There are 3 certified crisis negotiators in the region. Orono Police Department has 1 and the other 2 come out of the Penobscot Sheriff's Department, and they actually train together on a monthly basis. So it is a team and we're really happy to be able to participate, and it was a way that we could improve our response and ability to manage people that are in crisis in our community at a relatively inexpensive cost. The sign ordinance and evacuation and fill ordinances went to planning board and town council. Public hearings, there were no comments, major comments on those. My question for you is, are we all set to just put those on the agenda for the December 14th council meeting for adoption and discussion at that point? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Want to just let you know that nomination papers will be available on November 30th. We have 3 terms that will go from 2021 to 2024, and 1 term that will go from 2021 to 2023, because it's the remaining 2 years of Councilor Maynard's term. And we
So-
have
Can I interrupt you for just a second?
Sure.
So I had a little conversation with Shelley. She hasn't gotten back to me yet, but we just haven't bumped into each other again. Signatures
Yep.
during this COVID time. Put a
unless
mask on and go get them?
I think you got to get 25. And the only way that is going to change is if the governor changes it, because we actually follow state statute with that
Okay.
element. So we need 25 signatures.
Get a box.
You
of
want
clean
me
pens.
to, huh?
Get a box of clean pens.
So to pen to
25
everyone.
of
Well,
them.
you can have as many nomination pages as you need, I believe. You don't need to have them all on one
page.
page. So I mean, I think there are ways you could do that. But let me have a
Okay.
conversation with Shelley. She's on vacation.
Yeah, okay.
Like, she had an election, and so now she's on vacation.
She's on vacation.
And when she gets back, I'll follow up, and next time we convene, I'll have an answer for you.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
So Orono VZ Water District, we have a term that expires on December 31st, 2020. Deb Blease, who is currently serving as the chair, has indicated that she would be more than happy to serve another 5-year term. I will tell you, the last time we had a vacancy, it took us almost 2 years to find somebody who was willing to fill that term. So my question for you is, do you want me to go through the process of advertising this, or are you happy to renew Deb Blease's for a second term?
Renew Deb.
Absolutely, renew it.
Deb did great work, I think. I have absolutely no issue with that.
So that would just show up on the agenda, consent or new
Yep.
business?
Consent.
Consent. Okay. And I think that's it. I'm back from vacation. I'm not sure that is a super announcement, but I'm back.
Sophie,
Yes.
recycling, our magnets are different than our days. So what are we telling people, and how is this getting
So when
mediated here?
we discovered that not long after the magnet got distributed, it was brought to our attention. We've
Okay.
posted it in the Observer. We've changed it on the website, so the website has the correct dates. And we had made a sticker that we had offered people to come get that goes over your magnet with
I
the
don't know how I
right
missed
date.
that.
So
Okay.
I think at this point in time, I think staff did a good job of getting the word out. So if it's not resonating, I think the answer would be people are going to have to figure it out, or we're going to spend another $1,000 on new magnets for 6 months.
Also, the Recycle Coach app if you sign in using Orono as your municipality, that is actually correct. So you could use that to remind you, and that actually gives you reminders too when there's a holiday delay, et cetera. And that's
It
available
it
on-
wasn't just us. There's recycling like up and down the street too, so.
Oh, we heard from lots and lots of people.
Okay.
It's not just you, but that's what the Recycle Coach app is available on the App Store and on Google Play.
Okay.
Just every other week.
So that's all I had.
Okay. Great, then I would like to take a motion to go into executive session. Wait a minute, before I do that, Sophie,
This is how we're gonna do executive session.
yeah.
While we've been talking, Belle has sent you all a link to a meeting in your email. So you click, so if you leave this meeting and go to that one, we'll have the executive session. There will be no action coming out of that executive session. And we will close the meeting at that point. So we'll close this meeting, the public meeting, and then we'll go into the executive session at that point.
You want me to take the motion to go into executive session now?
Yes.
So moved.
Second,
All right, all those in favor?
Counselor Osher, are you in favor?
I am in favor.
Counselor Grenier? I didn't see you. Are you all right?
In favor, yeah.
Okay. I think that makes it unanimous.
We will all leave and find the link and come back.
very good.